Well, time now for our political panel this Wednesday, and joining me here in the Parliament House studio is Labor MP Josh Wilson, and beaming in from Melbourne Independent MP Zoe Daniel. Welcome to both of you. Josh Wilson, let's start with you. You heard your leader there talking about how Australia is considering these requests from Ukraine. Of course, there is a lot of goodwill there to help out the Ukrainian cause, but what more do you think can actually be done in this current climate?
Well, I guess we take our lead from Ukraine and from our partners who are engaged in supporting them, particularly NATO partners who are closer to the conflict than we are. That seems to be what's governed our response to date. We get requests. We know that the Bushmasters have been really effective and they'd like some more of those. And so far, as the Prime Minister says, both under the previous government and under this government, those responses from Australia have been timely and helpful and well received. So I expect we'll continue to follow that approach.
Do you think there's scope for Australian troops to be maybe sent to Eastern Europe to conduct these sort of training exercises with Ukrainian forces?
Well, I don't know what the proposition is as far as training is concerned. I saw some reference to that potentially involving personnel, Australian personnel being in the United Kingdom. I guess we would look at any proposal. The government would do that properly, and if we can be of assistance, we will, as we've done so far. I mean, to be the largest non-NATO contributor is entirely appropriate and not insignificant, considering the size of Australia and where we're placed.
Zoe Daniel, let's bring you into this one. Is there what in your view do you think is the scope for Australia to expand its support for Ukraine in this ongoing and seemingly never-ending conflict?
Yeah, hi Matt, and hello Josh. Look, I think we need to see the detail of what's being asked for. I think Australia has shown itself to be very willing to offer support. As Josh said, you know, Bushmasters have been well received. The Ukrainians could do with more of those. I think that's a request that should be seriously considered. In regard to training, well, it depends what's needed and where. I think there's a need to be cautious in regard to sending our troops some distance away, questions around whether they can be kept safe and protected, and also making sure that our own defence needs are prioritised. But that said, you know, I think the Ukrainians need to be given the tools to win this conflict, not just to not lose it. And if that can be helped by training from Australians, then that seems to be a valid request.
You mentioned they're keeping Australian troops safe while they're overseas. Is there also, not that it's a concern that I think necessarily would worry people, but that it could be seen if countries such as Australia start sending troops into Eastern Europe to conduct these sort of training exercises, that the Russian regime could see that as an escalation from the West as well?
Well, look, plainly, these things need to be carefully considered. And as you would know, in other conflicts around the world, we have often lent training resources, and often it sounds like a bigger thing than it is. It can sometimes be just a few people. And again, the Ukrainians need to be equipped both with equipment and expertise to succeed in their mission. So from that perspective, it seems like a valid request, but we haven't seen the detail. And at the end of the day, it's a decision for the Minister and the Prime Minister.
Let's move on to the biggest story of the day, which is the Bali anniversary, the Bali bombings anniversary. Josh Wilson, some quite moving scenes that we've seen not only here in Canberra but right around the country and also in Bali itself. It does seem like it was only yesterday that this attack occurred, and now we're looking at a 20-year anniversary. What do you think is the legacy of that devastating day?
Well, it's exactly as you say. It was a terrible day, and like a lot of those kinds of events, in one moment it feels like it was just yesterday, and in another moment it seems like it was 20 years ago. My son was nearly 2. My wife and I were expecting our second child. We'd had the September 11 events the year before. It was a bleak time. It was tough for everybody, but it was toughest of all for those who were victims and their families, their loved ones. And the service today, which was lovely here in Parliament, captured those things. It recognised that the pain certainly hasn't stopped, or probably in some cases diminished all that much for the people who are most closely affected. But it also reflected on the way that Australia and Indonesia responded to those events, and contrary to what the perpetrators may have wanted, it brought our countries closer together, and it brought out the best in our countries. It certainly brought out the best in Australia, and we showed fortitude and resilience, but care, compassion and love for one another through the aftermath of that, and still today. And I think it's important that we hold on to those good things.
Zoe Daniel, you spent quite a lot of time living in Southeast East Asia. Do you think that this was something of a turning point for how Australia saw the region and also dealt with the potential security threats that came out of the region?
Yeah, I think arguably if 9/11 was an awakening for the world, Bali was an awakening for Australia in regard to the risks and threat of international terrorism being right on our doorstep and hitting us in a place where so many Australians had been and continue to go. And in many ways that's informed our foreign policy and our attitudes around national security since. But counterintuitively, perhaps, as Josh suggested, it has actually opened the way to forge stronger relationships, particularly with Indonesia, and that's a positive thing. I think that, obviously, like most Australians who were alive at that time, I've spent today reflecting on the fact that the families of those killed never recover, but nor do the survivors, because even as a survivor, the memories of those days will be haunting, and the loss of friends and relatives on that day would never leave them. So my thoughts are with those people today.
Let's turn to some domestic policy now, and I'll stay with you on this one, Zoe Daniel. The crossbench still very keen to see the passage of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. So I'm conflating the old name and the new name together in that question. The National Anti-Corruption Commission, seeing that legislation get through Parliament. We know that the crossbench had some concerns about the wording of that legislation when it was finally presented to Parliament. The Attorney-General has appeared at the Press Club today saying that, as far as he's concerned, this is the model to go forward. Are you seeing any more movement from the government to allay some of the concerns that you and your colleagues on the crossbench have?
Oh, look, this is a bill and it's in a process of consultation now, as it should be. And I do believe that the Attorney-General, although I agree with him, I think broadly this is the right model, understands that there will be some fine-tuning done to this bill before it's passed. That's the whole point of the consultation process and the fine-tooth combing that the likes of people like me are doing through the language of the bill. So, yeah, there are a few concerns, particularly about public hearings, potentially about the capacity to raid journalists and media, from my perspective, and third parties, and just how they're treated under the legislation. But broadly, I think it is largely in line with Helen Haynes' bill, and I am optimistic that it can be passed before Parliament rises at the start of December.
Josh Wilson, let's pick up on the issue of public hearings, because that has always been the most contentious element when we're talking about an anti-corruption commission. Do you think that the public understands why there has needed to be this exceptional circumstances clause inserted into the legislation to protect some of those hearings, or does it scream of the secrecy that Labor railed against for a long time during the campaign and even beforehand?
Well, look, I guess I'd start with the way you framed that. I mean, I don't know that I'd agree that it's the most contentious issue. The most contentious issue in this area has been, in recent times, whether or not Australia would get a national anti-corruption commission, integrity and anti-corruption commission. That's the biggest thing that we need to see in Australia to improve governance and faith in our democracy. The community has wanted it for a long time, and it's only going to be delivered because the community elected a Labor government that said we're going to do it. And as Zoe says, there's every reason to hope that it actually will be legislated before the end of the year. That's a massive thing, and it's been long needed. The issue of public hearings, I understand, and it is an aspect of the way that the community regards it as being a transparent kind of process. But the fundamental thing to hold on to is that the independent commissioner will decide to hold public hearings if they believe that the circumstances merit it and that it's in the public interest. And I think the fact that there's been a lot of conversation around this perhaps has led some in the community to think that what's proposed varies from what's happened at the state level, and that's not true. I mean, the state level commissions, which have done great work, they do hold some proceedings in open court, and they do some sort of in a closed court environment for all of the good reasons that the Attorney General has spoken about, and that I think every parliamentarian and every thinking member of the public understands. So I just come back to what I said. I mean, the most important thing is Australia could well have legislated an anti-corruption commission by the end of this year. That will be a massive and long-needed achievement. And the parliamentary process that's occurring and the scrutiny of the bill through the committee process will no doubt further refine where we get to, and that's a healthy thing too.
Well, Josh Wilson and Zoe Daniel, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Thank you.